Coffee. I have with me today a very special guest, our Des Moines Bureau Chief, Erin Murphy. Erin, welcome to the Careers in Coffee, your first time here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we have a lot of great journalists at the Gazette, and I think it's important that we have conversations with them about what's going on with Iowa workforce. And Erin, you wrote a story recently where you talked with the state economist, and I was hoping you could maybe give us a little bit of information about that story. It was all about how Iowa's workers' losses will be difficult for us to recoup. So can you talk to us a
Yeah,
little bit about that?
yeah, absolutely. It was interesting because I think a lot of us have heard, and especially if you follow the news regularly, you've probably heard about the workforce issues that are out there. And it's not, that part of it is not unique to Iowa. A lot of states are dealing with that still coming out of the pandemic. That a lot of workers just didn't return to the workforce. And so a lot of businesses are having difficulty hiring, and that worker shortage is very prevalent. What was unique and interesting in this discussion that I had with Peter Orazem, who is a professor of economics at the Iowa State University, um, was how he talked about what may be somewhat unique to Iowa could be the difficulty that our state will have re- recouping those workers, making up for those losses, and some of the reasons why that is. So while the problem is, like I said, out there for every state, Iowa may have a harder time rebounding from this than other states.
Does that kind of tied to our slow or non-existent population growth? Is that kind of what he's referring to?
Yeah, that is a big part of it. That has been an issue in Iowa for more than a decade now. The Like you said, I think you put it well, slow to borderline non-existent population growth here in Iowa. We've lagged far behind the rest of the country in population growth. So that's a big part of it. Another part of it, and it kind of links to another sort of story that I wrote that's kind of tangentially related to this a little while back, is the issue with Iowa's so-called brain drain, which is young people who are raised and educated here, but then leave the state to join the workforce elsewhere and
Hmm.
don't come back. So Iowa's a little older than the average population, so we have more people retiring and fewer young people staying in the state and replacing those workers who either retire or leave the state for other reasons. And we don't, as we just talked about, our population isn't growing. We don't attract a lot of people to the state either compared to other states. So all that kind of adds up, and is what this economics expert was talking about. What make it difficult for our state to recoup these worker losses.
Hmm. So that's really interesting because there are still quite a few job seekers in the state of Iowa that are looking for work that are kind of, that would say that they are struggling to find work, even though we have like these kind of lots of positions that are either open now or soon to be open because of retiring workforce. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the magical answer, other than I know that part of what you're describing there is a need to kind of match the skill levels that are required for the jobs that are open versus the skill levels that are possessed by our people who are looking for jobs right now. And maybe that's, I know that traditionally is an issue, and that's why there are state programs designed to address that, try to help people get the you know skills for certain kinds of jobs, whether it's trades or whatever it may be. So that may be where some of that disconnect is, that there are some people who are looking for work too, and maybe they just don't have the right skills that match the jobs that are open right now. You will hear people say that some of the jobs that are open aren't the best paying jobs, and that's
Mhm.
part of the problem. Although you're starting to see that change now too. I mean, if you look all the way to the basic level, where like fast food places are starting to pay well above the minimum wage now, it's not uncommon at all to see the McDonald's and Burger Kings of the world's hiring for $15 an hour, in Des Moines, anyways. I can say so. So that disconnect is still there too. You're right, and yeah, I didn't talk with Peter about that specifically, but I do know that skills issue is something that the state has tried to tackle.
Hmm. So you talked about some programs at the state level, and since you're covering kind of the state, are you seeing more conversations about those, or just more news about the different programs? It sounds like there's a lot of money headed to community colleges to help people upskill, but
Yep.
the reality is that it's always a lag between the job seekers' knowledge of those programs and their ability to get into those programs.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do hear a lot of conversation around those kinds of programs, and I'm guessing I will again in a couple weeks here. The legislative session for 2023 will begin. I would be shocked if this is not a topic of conversation, at least to some degree, about what they can do to not only continue to support those existing programs, but maybe develop new ones, or add more resources to them, so more funding to them, so more people can take advantage. It will be interesting to see how that discussion plays out right now, but I do expect to hear it. I do expect state lawmakers to try to address this in any ways that they can.
Yeah, I think there's even this. I don't think this was your story, but it was a Iowa City labor apprenticeship that they had going with like a smaller group down there, where they were able to get all kinds of workers into an apprenticeship program, and it was just a very grassroots level. And I think they used like pandemic funds or ARPA funding, or infrastructure funding for that.
One of those, and yeah, and that's a great point too. I mean, there's so much of that funding available right now. I don't know the number, the percentage off the top of my head right now, but I know the state of Iowa still hasn't gone through all of its federal relief funding, and it's been putting in money into programs already, and I'm sure we'll see more. So there's opportunities right now, without a doubt, to bolster those kinds of programs. So that's why I say it'll be very interesting to see what legislators prioritize and what they try to address this session.
Yeah, that will be interesting. Do you feel like, this is kind of, I don't know if you are covering this, but like, are there certain industries that you're seeing that are going to struggle more from this brain drain, or even the retire? There are some businesses in Cedar Rapids even that have a large group of aging workforce that may all retire relatively within the same time frame.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't heard about any specific industry that's more worried about that than others. I think it's fairly widespread. It'll be interesting to see manufacturing, maybe, if that could be an industry that's a little more on edge over this than the others. But my sense is, and I think it's an interesting question and be a good one to put to some more folks like I've been talking to, but is that it's a pretty widespread issue, and there's no one industry that's more concerned than the others. I think it's impacting everybody.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's getting in the way of us, capturing new businesses to move to Iowa because we don't have enough workforce? Or
it's hard, I can't point to specific examples, but it's hard to imagine that it's not having that kind of impact, and all of those things that we discussed. So if there's a worker shortage, it kind of creates its own vicious cycle, right? If there's a worker shortage, then maybe businesses are more hesitant to come in, and then if businesses are hesitant to come in, then there's less reason for those young people that we educate to stay here, because the opportunities are somewhere else instead. So and that's why what Professor Orzum had to say about this was all interesting, because it's tough to see what's the the method or the approach that kind of breaks that cycle and kind of gets Iowa headed in the right direction. One of the things that, and I can't remember if he said this specifically, or I know talking into other business groups, I hear this a lot. I apologize, I'm scanning my story. He did say this specifically. and I also have heard this from other business groups, is immigration. That's one way that Iowa can welcome new people and people who could potentially jump in and join and help bolster the state's workforce. You hear that a lot about the need for a good, strong immigration program at the federal level, and whatever reforms that need to come to make it so people who want to come here legally can come here and find a home and become members of the community, including members of the workforce. And that's one thing I hear about a lot from Iowa economic experts and business leaders.
So that's interesting. I do kind of wonder if some of these things will kind of solve themselves over time, just because we know that there's a decline in students at Iowa high schools pursuing college degrees. So they're going to filter more into these community colleges, which potentially could fill them into these, jobs that no one grows up thinking, I'm going to be this when I grow up, because the job either didn't exist or is just really hard to describe. We were talking with a hospital, and like, how do you describe the role that is the central sterilization role? Like, what is that worker called? And what goes into that job? Is that a rewarding career? It's hard for these businesses to just kind of explain the different jobs that they have done, because they've evolved over the years and changed, and they require, definitely skills and expertise, but not necessarily a 4-year degree.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the point. And you are seeing a definite shift in that conversation about the I feel like for a while there, and certainly while I was growing up, the only goal was to go to a 4-year college and
Right.
get a 4-year degree. And I think you are definitely seeing that conversation shift in recent years, and it feels like it just keeps growing and growing. And this whole situation may make that conversation grow even more, because to the point you're making there are a lot of jobs out there, and not just jobs in the most basic sense, good careers, good paying jobs that can be good careers that you can be trained for with a 2-year degree at a community college or other kinds of programs. So you are definitely starting to see that conversation shift. And to circle back to your question, I think this could potentially right size itself eventually, as that conversation continues and more people kind of look to these kinds of careers and that kind of training, right from the start, rather than, trying a different path and realizing later in life that maybe a different route was better. I think you'll see more young people starting on that path right from the get-go, and maybe that helps us kind of, like I said, kind of right size this more naturally.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Erin. I think if we have any advice for job seekers, I think the picture for Iowa is a little bit darker, just not having this population grow. But for the job seekers in Iowa, the picture is a little bit brighter, because whether or not we go through a recession next year or there's a sluggish growth, there will still be lots of employers competing for local talent to fill positions. So the opportunities we talked about with reskilling are growing in Iowa. So there is a lot of opportunity if you're not in a role that you like to reskill. If you're having trouble finding a role, upskilling and taking advantage of some of these programs. So we'll put all that in the show notes along with Erin's story. And thanks so much for joining us for our first journalist careers in copy. I'm pretty excited about this.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it's a great topic. It's a great discussion. It's a huge issue. The story that you talked about, and then I referenced the one earlier. Those are some of the stories I've gotten the most reader feedback on, which is kind of surprised to me for all the things that I cover. So it's obviously an issue that a lot of people are tuned into too. So I think any conversation we can have about it is a good thing.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thanks, and you have a great day.
Thank you, Liz. You too.